I really enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3. I have over 100 hours in it. And of course, it justifiably won so many Year of the Game awards. It won so many Game of the Year awards. Well, we can edit that out in post-production. Baldur's Gate 3 was a fantastic game that ushered in a feeling of a time that seemed to have passed. In a day and age where many developers are making shitty game after shitty game cash grabs, Larian Studios did not come out of nowhere because they've been around for a long time, but I feel like they finally got noticed by such a large audience and getting rewarded for just having really good business practices that are consumer friendly, and they made a fantastic game to boot. So I am a huge Larian fanboy now. I've played Divinity Original Sin 2 and Baldur's Gate 3, but there was an interview here with Sven Vincke, who I think is super admirable and a total badass. He is the CEO of Larian, and he had an interview here that was just done at GDC. Let's take a look at it.
It is GDC 2024 here in San Francisco, which means it's been a little bit tricky to put together a traditional episode of Spot On. As you can see, Lucy is not sat next to me. She's actually out talking to people, taking appointments, and seeing a few games. Instead of a normal episode, I've actually got something different this time. I sat down with Swen from Larian to talk about Baldur's Gate 3, specifically the development and the highs and lows of it, but we also talk about the future of Larian and Baldur's Gate as a franchise. It's a really interesting chat that I hope you get a lot out of. We'll be back with a traditional episode next week, but I hope you enjoy this one until then.
It's really cool because people are of course wondering, is Baldur's Gate 4 coming? Are there expansions coming? Are there DLCs coming? And I caught a couple of quotes from Sven Vincke about that and the future of it. And so I found this interview and I would like to look at it together. Yeah, this guy has a great voice.
I'm sure you've had this question a million times now, but the success of Baldur's Gate 3, like, has it really sunk in at this point? Or have you reached a point where you're like beyond that, where you're like, oh, we're winning awards and we're going to things? It's just kind of understood now.
It's an interesting one because we're a very introspective company. So we've always tried to improve ourselves as we progressed over the years. And so we were elated, obviously, by the reception. But very rapidly, we started discussing, we can do this better, we can do this better, we can do this better. So we first took a long break. And then now we're on something new. We just moved forward. And for us, that chapter is close. Obviously, we're doing patches and we're doing updates and so forth. But it's been nice. But there's so much stuff to do already that's overtaken it.
This is probably difficult for anyone outside of the studio to really get a comprehension of, other than looking at numbers.
Is this guy Dutch? He's Dutch-Belgian. I mean, he's not Dutch, he's Belgian, but he speaks Dutch, yes.
But the scale of its success, is it already like significantly more than your previous games? And because of that, has it pushed you into like new territory of game development where you're like encountering challenges that you never had before?
Yes. It's almost double DOS 2 now. It's really doing really, really well because DOS 2 is very successful.
Wow, it has outperformed Divinity 2 Original Sin by double in less than a year. Right? It's been less than a year. Divinity 2 is from 2017. What I learned from the leaked documents of Bethesda when they suffered a data breach is that the expectation for a game release profits is of course most in the first year of release, and then there was something like a 30% profit in the second year and 15% profit in the third year, and then there's a drop off. And then of course that's why we're getting Skyrim Special Edition and so on, is to reinvigorate that fire of monetization for the game. Yeah, I think Divinity is still a fantastic game to start right now.
Yeah. So it did beyond what we expected. We already scaled up heavily during BG3, so that brings new challenges with it, things that we hadn't encountered before. So things that's what I meant with the introspection, things that we're struggling with, trying to figure out what's the right way of dealing with this. The biggest thing right now, and it's something that I'm actively fighting against, is fear of doing less in the next one or not doing as well. It's a lot of pressure. ever since we took our destiny in our own hands and left publishers behind, our Metacritic has been going up.
Right.
So we're at 96 now.
Right.
And so
I remember he said that he didn't want to call it Divine Divinity, the RPG they made over 20 years ago, but their publisher wanted it because they were like a huge fan of what's it called, alliteration, where it's two words start with the same letter. He thought that was lame, and they never refer to it internally as Divine Divinity. So yeah, actually the luxury of being able to let behind a publisher so you have full creative control must be so nice.
So there's like, we need to do better. And I said, like, you just got to forget about it and follow your gut feeling, right? But just don't try to perfection everything, because otherwise you're not going to get anything done anymore. Larian's been built for making big things. I mean, like, our initial struggles always were because we wanted to do bigger things than the people funding us wanted us to do. And that was the source of conflict.
They wanted to do more.
So now that we can, the problem is rather like, how do we constrain ourselves from doing too much? So it's more of a that type of management that's necessary. So, like, funnily enough, this morning I had a meeting with a whole bunch of directors, and we were saying, like, guys, that's too much. Yeah, we got to scale it down a little bit, because we're going to run into trouble with all the stuff that we want to change. There was a lot of calculation behind how we made Baldur's Gate 3. There was.
I honestly think he's such a good leader of the game. Like the way he speaks about it and stuff, and what he's achieved with Divinity Original Sin and Baldur's Gate 3, it must come from a very good point of leadership.
There's a plan behind it. Obviously, we were confronted with a number of things that we didn't expect that made it more problematic to as a development. So there's a balance between the two things, right? So you got to try new stuff, or you're going to go become stale, and that's really not why we started doing this. At the same time, you need to build upon your strengths from the past, right, and try to improve those. So I think BG3 was a really good example of how you took everything that we did in DOS 2 and you pushed it further, right? And you could see the big thing was we were going to bring in cinematics. But if you look at all the small things, there's a lot of innovation at the level of turn-based combat. There was really a lot of innovation done there. And a lot of them were risky. We didn't know if they were going to work up front, right? And so I can guarantee you with the plans that we have right now, there's a lot of risk in there. Right. So we don't know if it's going to work. But then again, also, if you want to be creative, you gotta be able to fail. So.
This is such an important mindset in game development and in general. Like, being able to take those risks is going to create, on average, much better games. And that's generally what publishers don't want. Like, on average, publishers are so risk averse. That's why you get like the churn of the mill standard game releases that are just iterating 1% different on the previous release. You know, like the different FIFA games. They just want safe games. That's why when like a really successful game comes out, like Baldur's Gate 1 back when, or Dune 1, or Command & Conquer, then you see loads of offshoots that are all creating that same game style. You can call them clones, offshoots, inspired by, copycats, whatever you want to call them. But it's like, okay, now we know this works. It's been shown once. Now we know it works. And it's just safer. It's really risky to do something new. Looks like he's really trying to maintain that core identity.
So, yeah. Do you foresee yourself following a similar like development process as you did with BG3? Because it was quite unlike most other development processes, and it seems to have paid off for you in that regard. Do you want to do it that same way, or do you feel like, oh, the next thing is going to be a bit different?
Well, I mean, my GDC talk showed the initial design, part of the initial design doc that we had to supply to Wizards of the Coast. And it said, like, you know what, we're just going to make Act 1. We're going to put it in early access. We're going to see what players think about it. And then we're going to make Act 2 and 3. So we'll figure it out as we go. So I think that's the same thing we did with Original Sin 2. I think it's a viable approach for us to do that again. I wouldn't be surprised, although plans can change, that we do exactly that. We just focus on making a large chunk of content. We go into early access. We see what the players think, if they agree with us. And then we'll move on from there, and then we'll see.
So this is the system they're now experienced in, by using early access and then fine-tuning loads of different micro and macro decisions. I imagine it might be quite hard for them to do a game without that now that this is their working process, since all of them have experience with it. But I wonder, and of course, it's not exactly the same as what Stormgate is doing, but I guess in a way, what I'm wondering is, does Stormgate have that third faction yet? Do they have Tier 3 yet? when they made their early access? Did they have it but are hiding it or iterating, or are they literally just not having it yet and then seeing just what's necessary based on what people want? But it's it's very useful feedback to stand on, and it's going to be difficult to deviate from it once you've got a system like that. But I wonder, how do you create story continuity in a game like Baldur's Gate 3, where you make Act 1 but you don't think of how it ends yet? Because maybe you've made certain decisions in Act 1 that will like have far-reaching consequences for Act 2 and 3 that you may not be ready for.
See what it does. But there's a lot of discovery in the creative process, and we're in pre-production phases, so we don't know yet exactly what we're going to make. We know the general direction.
Yeah. There's this trend where a game succeeds, and then everyone else kind of is like, we need to make our version of that. And it's been happening for as long as I've been playing games. Everyone wants to kind of create the trend or chase the success of another team, and often it's like there's not a lot of insight into how that process works. For you, what don't you want the industry to take away from the story of Baldur's Gate 3 and the development process of Baldur's Gate 3? What are the red flags or the hurdles that you think like, hey, don't want to do this?
You need to.
I really like this interviewer, by the way. Oh, it's just from GameSpot, right? You're gonna just sub, get more news like this.
Make sure you have enough fuel to do it. Yeah. That's probably the biggest one. I mean, like, we had reserve fuel based on the success of the original Sin 2 to engage with this. We upscaled our ambitions when we saw the success in early access.
Right.
So we would have not done that if we would have seen that early access wasn't as successful. So I think the most important lesson for us is how important dashboarding is, so you can actually see your fuel meter, so you don't run out of money and you don't get into trouble, because it does remain the fuel that you need to make your game. If you do it at the scale that we do it, with the amount of level of permutations, the amount of immersion gameplay, you're going to run into trouble, guaranteed. So that means that you need to have reserves.
What was it like as a team to keep having to kind of keep that wind in everyone's sails? Was it difficult, or did everyone just kind of like, no, this is something special, we're going to go for it?
For sure the latter. I mean, that was from the get-go when we started working on Baldur's Gate. I mean, that's also the reason why I picked the project, because I knew there was going to be a lot of passion for it. A lot of people play a lot of D&D, or Baldur's Gate for a lot of them was the first RPG they've ever played, and the first love is always special. But it took long. 6 years is too long. So
6 years.
We tried. We didn't want it to be 6 years,
really?
But the summation of problems that we had. First, our ambition in blending immersion gameplay with cinematics is very complicated. We had to discover a whole bunch of things. So that delayed. Then we had COVID, obviously, that delayed. We had the war in Ukraine, that delayed. And then we had a bunch of things not working out, that delayed. We had the Stadia problems, that delayed. The sum of all those things added quite a lot of delays.
Stadia?
And we had the war in Ukraine, that delayed. And then we had a bunch of things not working out, that delayed. We had the Stadia problems.
Stadia, Stadia did not work out, that's correct. We actually got a refund on that. I saw the Stadia thing, and they were like, pre-order your Stadia controller now to get ready for the future of gaming, and you can reserve your username there. And I was like, I gotta get follow Grubby there. Let's order 2 controllers. Done. They came. Controllers arrived. I put them in the cupboard, left them there for years. Years later, I read Stadia's shutting down. You can get refund. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's do it. And then there's actually guides where you can, because you can keep the controllers, there's guides where you can turn your controllers into non-Stadia locked controllers, usable with any device. So it's actually become profitable. I got free controllers out of it.
That delayed. The sum of all those things added quite a lot of delay. So by the time we were approaching the end, we were in the funny situation where most teams were finished,
right,
except for a few teams that weren't finished. Right? So when it came to make the decision, are we going to delay it even further because we were competing with Starfield for the same slot? The interesting bit was the team said, "Fuck no!" Pardon my language. So no, we're not going to go later. Even we want it out. I mean, it's ready, it's there, everything is there. We still have to do a bunch of things, but we want to do these, so the game is out there. It's been long enough.
It's just one of the many GigaChat things that Larian ended up doing. Everyone's either releasing on date, relatively feature ready or full feature ready, or it's releasing on the date not ready, or it's being delayed once or multiple times, and when it finally releases, it's partially ready. But no, Larian preponed it. And I guess, of course, everyone was comparing Starfield to Baldur's Gate 3. I actually was more hyped for Baldur's Gate 3, but I was also very hyped for Starfield, but only one delivered.
So it's
The only way that the other delivered is in bashing reviews that I'm kind of binging right now on YouTube. Starfield.
So the fact that it took so long, that is was not by design, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But mean, it's better than crunching it.
That's what I was going to say. Like,
it.
For you as a team, like 6 years, you identified as too long. What do you think is the right amount of time for you guys?
I think if we could do something in 4 years, we'll be happy.
Right.
I think we will ambition 3 years, but that only happened once. It was the original Sin 2.
Yeah.
That was because it was really very mature and the changes that we did were smart. This one was a quantum leap. We went from non-cinematics to cinematics.
Yeah.
So that's a very high level of energy that you need to put into it. So 3-4 years is, I think, something everybody's comfortable with when you're making an RPG, but it's hard to get that done in that time. So we'll see where we end up.
How do you feel about people aspiring to make games like Baldur's Gate 3 now that your game is out there?
Well, I hope somebody makes one so I can play it without knowing the story. For sure. I started this company because I wanted...
Oh my god, developers that play games.
To make games that I want to play,
right?
And like a lot of people joined for that reason. They want to make games that they like to play because we're aligned. So I would like others to make games like that because I would like to play them. And I never play a game when it's finished. So when we finish development, I never play my own games again,
right?
Because I've played them enough by then. So I would really like to have a story I don't know and get just like the same sense of gameplay.
Are there parts of Baldur's Gate 3 that are still a surprise to you? Where you're like, I did not know that, or are you fairly across all of it and you know every nook and cranny?
I'm not going to say every nook and cranny, but I would dare to say 99%.
Okay, well,
I was all over it.
So tell us about your GDC talk.
You know, Sven Vincke looks a lot like one of my brothers. Yeah, a lot of his mannerisms. Like, I feel like I'm looking at someone I've known my whole life.
Because you kind of delved into the extensive history of the development, right?
So what I did is I went through our lead meetings from the last 6 years. And our lead meetings is basically a weekly meeting every Wednesday where all of our leads and directors go into a Google Meet room. And we chat about the problems that we're having. So it's by definition a negative document because it's about problems. So it's not about the successes that we're having. But it's a really interesting look at the firefighting that we had to do throughout the entire game. There were certain trends that you could see would get us into trouble. The seeds were already there from the get-go. We just didn't realize it back then, right? So we learned about them. You could see how we mitigated, how we adapted. The team was really, really, really good at adapting to... there's a lot of seniority, so they know how to deal with whatever shitstorm comes in their direction. Fascinating, actually. It was fascinating for me. And you know what the most fascinating thing was? It was that we were doing exactly the same mistakes right now as we were starting on a new project, as we did in 2018. So it was really like, wow, we need to talk about this. It was a really good exercise. And so I just basically went through our journey from the get-go, from the very first moment that we talked to Wizards of the Coast, why we did this game, all the way to really almost in 3-act structure, including the Dark Night of the Soul of the creation of Baldur's Gate 3, because we had quite a journey.
Of those fires, which one really stands out to you as being the one that you're most proud of, and also the one that you were like, damn, I wish that hadn't happened? Are there any of
those? At the same time, like if I really... it has nothing to do with game development. It was getting our team out of Russia when the war started. I mean, like the way that our team rallied to help everybody.
How did you do that? Like without,
We just essentially said, like, the moment it started, we said we need to close. So
they have a lot of work from home people, I guess, all over the world.
We were there for 10 years. We need to get our people out. There was nobody that was in support of this war, so they wanted to all get out. We have people that have relatives and friends in Ukraine. We need to help them. So our entire operations team essentially went into incredible amount of work in terms of relocating, getting passports sorted out, trying to figure out what the every day the laws were changing.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out where everybody was. How do we get it? We had the wife of one of our developers was stuck in Kharkiv, was being bombarded. So how do we get her out?
Yeah.
So there was there was really.
Is that normal for companies to help their employees in such a way? I mean, I feel like it should probably be normal, but I'm not sure it is. I think there's going to be a lot of companies where they're not going to help with that at all, depending on the country and everything.
Really a lot of panic initially.
We had the same thing for programmers. It is normal. Many companies do. They throw you under the bus. Normal, some don't. It happens quite a lot, yeah. So the company treats its employees as resources that need to be protected. So it's like an RTS then.
So because it was a horrible situation. And so, you forget about work then, right? So
I was going to say, how do you continue making a game knowing that you have to... So
you don't.
You guys just
Yeah,
stop?
no, I mean, like, so many people were affected by it. I guess, there was still some development going on, but certainly there were a lot of people involved in trying to sort it out. And that goes very far, because when, as a developer or as a person really, if you have to leave your home country and leave everything behind, and you arrive elsewhere, you've just been uprooted like hell.
Yeah.
You need to be helped, and so the developers and the teams were so everybody relocated, or almost everybody, to other studios. So we had a deal. I probably shouldn't talk about that, but we managed to get them to a studio where they had a buddy. So we had buddies from the team helping the person that had been uprooted.
Oh, they assigned liaisons
and do that. So it was good to see from a team point of view. It was obviously a horrible situation to start from. So that's the one I think I'm probably the proudest of how the team rallied around it, and that I'm the most regretful about. That's something like this can still happen.
Yeah. At what point did you start thinking about what's next for the studio?
Before we started. So this was part of a
Before we started Baldur's Gate 3, he started thinking about what's next after. That's a visionary.
A larger plan that I have towards what I call the very big RPG that will dwarf them all.
So Baldur's Gate isn't that RPG?
No.
Wow.
No, not at all. But it's a very long plan, complicated.
So the next game isn't that RPG either. It's another step towards it.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I think there's some tech that we don't have yet.
Okay.
And then I hope.
Ooh, they're gonna make another RPG. There's some tech that is not existing yet?
I think there's some tech that we don't have yet.
Oh, that we don't have yet. Okay. Alien technology. Ooh, interesting. Secret tech. And he said it's not going to be Baldur's Gate.
And then I hope, I don't know what the specs are going to be in the next gen, but I hope we're going to get something that's going to bring us closer. When it came to BG3, everybody was telling you got to make DLC.
Yeah.
You got to make DLC, and really you should be starting on a sequel. Right? This is so successful, it makes so much money.
Wow.
And so for a while I was actually, I say, that's what we should be doing. We should change our plans, we should be doing that. And so team actually said, yeah, we should be doing that. And then, but then later in the year I realized, well, that's not what we're made for. I mean, like, that's literally the opposite of what Larian is about. We want to do big new things. We don't want to rehash the thing that we've done already. So that's when we said, we're not going to do that. So we're just back on our original plan, which is going to the next thing, and then the bigger thing.
What was the distinction between DOS and DOS 2 and this? Because obviously you say you don't want to do the same thing again, but there was clearly something between those two games.
Okay, so DOS 1...
Do you know how many people and how many companies would choose to do the DLC or the expansion? Passionless or otherwise, with or without passion? Just because, 99%, of course. It made a buttload of money. If they had a publisher, their publisher would have already commandeered them to go and do it. They don't have a publisher. They still feel like it's the thing that makes sense. You go and do it again. Do you know how many streamers play games they don't like anymore just because it's the thing that might make them the most money? Because it's the most popular? Same thing, right? It's like, I really don't feel like playing this game anymore, but I really should. Like, it happens a lot. Thankfully, almost never to me, but not never. Right? And I say thankfully, but that's a decision I make too, right? And you see a lot of streamers out there, they hate the game they play. They hate it. It constantly makes them unhappy. They are locked in a relationship with it anyway. An abusive relationship, because people like to watch them play it and they don't really like to watch them play a lot of other things. They've pigeonholed themselves into one role. That's why you need to break out of that role sometimes. If Adam Sandler and Jim Carrey wanted to break out of doing one comedy flick after the next, they need to take a risk. And then you get something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is fantastic. Like, oh wow, he's actually very good in a serious role.
It was a game where we finally figured out how to do multiplayer in an RPG environment, and where we had immersion gameplay as the core of the entire game. But the narrative was really not very good.
Yeah.
We didn't focus on it. With those two, we focused heavily on the narrative.
Right.
We focused heavily on agency, branching storylines, making sure that you could express your identity in the game, and we learned a lot from doing that. With BG3, we brought that identity at the personal level. So the cinematics elevated all of the storytelling. They made sure that it became emotional. It became very, very engaging. We increased the amount of permutations that we put into the game.
It's very good.
So we learned how to handle that chaos in very complicated production environment, which is what AAA development is.
Right.
So for the next thing, you'll see.
Well, can you tell us anything about it, or can you?
No, I can't.
What it isn't? What it is?
Well, it's not Baldur's Gate 4. It's not Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so
that's amazing.
Not D&D, not Baldur's Gate 4, no DLC, no expansion for Baldur's Gate. While that may be disappointing for some or many, I actually like it. I think it's a good thing. Like, of course, it's the thing that would make sense and everything, but it's going to be compared. I think it's nice they dare to do new things. New IP, perhaps. I don't know if it's going to be Divinity Original Sin 3. Like, you have to admire it. Yeah, I love this. I love it because it shows a risk-taking and a confidence, like, we did this one amazing thing, and this thing will now never transmutate into something else. It will never turn to shit because it's not being changed or added to. It will always be good. And of course, they're going to iterate and like improve Act 3 or performance, or they wrote like an extra ending in Baldur's Gate 3, which of course I've not experienced because I've not ended the game yet. This feels so refreshing, and just it improves my love for Larian even more.
It's good to know. This kind of like, how far ahead have you planned this? Because now that you talk about it in that way, I can see, each game is like an evolutionary step in the studio's capabilities, more than just, how do we make money or like be successful. When did that original plan come up, and how far into the future does it extend? Is there a point where you're like, by this year, that thing that I wanted to achieve should be done?
So this really, so there were two moments. I think the bigger scope of things was during Original Sin 1. So I could see what was not good. But we didn't have the resources to do it. So I started thinking about how can we do it. I signed Baldur's Gate while we were making Original Sin 2, so I didn't know if we were going to be successful. But I knew that we were going to need something to leverage ourselves upon, because if we were going to go in a more expensive production values environment, we needed every single little bit of help that we could in terms of getting widespread attention, because we would need to sell more units to be able to pay for the development. So it was really during Original Sin 1. Before that, we were just struggling to survive. So we just went from game to game and really often fucking up. But that's game development is messy. We're always very ambitious, never about profit. Always went to the point that we didn't have any money anymore when we made our games, even here with BG3.
They ran out of money in Baldur's Gate 3. Sometimes I'm so happy Larian made 6.5 times their investment. They did? Is that like the number that's floating? Do you have any source for that, Seastone? Some people, they believe that a company's only identity is to make money. And in a way, that's true. A company is not comprised of individuals. It's just an entity. It's like a listing, right? A company's only real purpose is to make money and to live long and to keep making money. Right? But companies are comprised of power-holding individuals, such as Sven Vincke, and they can influence how that changes the DNA of a company. essentially it's inhibiting what a company wants. A company doesn't want anything, but its only purpose is to make money. You can mess with that by your own personal preferences. So if you change the direction of what this amorphous, non-feeling company wants, which is just to make money, but you change it into something like, no, consumer friendliness, sustenance, sustainable reputation, long-term, things we're passionate about, keeping some of the best programmers in the business because you're doing something that actually feels like it matters from an artistic point and from consumer friendliness point, then I do think you can create the better good for the company as well in an indirect way that isn't just maximizing profits. But it does sound weird when he says it's not all about money, because from 99% of people, when I hear someone say that, or maybe 95%, in our company it wasn't about making money or it wasn't about profit, I'll be like, I'll call bullshit. But because I've seen their example of, Divinity Original Sin, of Baldur's Gate 3, I've seen their work ethics, I believe him when he says it, at least for now. SBS, I mean, Larian as a company still needs to make money because it needs to pay people, right? And if they make more, then they can do another big project. I think when he says it kind of feels true.
So it really is about like just trying to make something really good that you want to play. And I talked about that. I briefly talked about it. When I make a game, what I'm looking for is the thing that made me fall in love with games. Is that special moment of elation?
Right.
Like it's gonna be good. And it's rare. But when you have it, you're really happy, and that's the bit that I'm trying to get into our games. And with BG3, for a long time, I had that feeling like when everything would fall into place, but I could see it. I said, I'm really happy. And I kept on, it was a mistake, by the way, that I made, because I kept on telling the team it's going to be so cool. And as a result of that, they didn't see the errors anymore because they thought it was cool. And I actually had the developer tell me, like, I said, what did I do wrong? You weren't making noise. I said, what do you mean? You were saying it was cool. I said, well, you could see it wasn't finished.
Right, yeah, that's an interesting conundrum.
Like, and it was really weird because I was really positive about the game and they wanted me to be negative about it, so they knew what to fix. So it was really funny.
Yeah, that's interesting. How far ahead do you reg? Is it a 10-year plan? Is it a 20-year plan?
I have a general sense of what I want to achieve. So I mean, like, it'll adapt to circumstances, to technology, to Larian's situation, because I don't know where we are going to be X years from now, so it's very hard.
Everyone right now is like, games, making games it's the worst time to be making games. Do you think it is the worst time to be making games? And is there a concern that things might not be able to accommodate the vision that you have in the future, given the path we're on now?
So it's a really difficult question to answer because I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, obviously right now there are a lot of people losing their jobs, so that's it's very upsetting, especially when it happens to you. For us, I had the equivalent in the sense like when publishers cut the money stream and I didn't have anything coming in anymore. It's a similar feeling. So we were very often very touch and go. So I don't wish that upon anybody. At the same time, you saw this happen before, specifically in 2009, which was one of our darkest days. When you had the economic crisis, the business model had changed also, because people were making lots of derivative work. Like there were 500 versions of My Little Pony that were being printed.
I played 499
and millions of units were being sent out. At some point, just people didn't buy it anymore. All those cartridges came in. It caused disaster among the publishers at the time, who were just chasing the same thing over and over. So very similar And so what happened there then, however, was that it was very dark days. Lots of people lost their jobs. But then it created opportunities for plenty of other people. So you saw a whole bunch of studios that actually rose in the same period or I think you're going to see quite a lot of new studios form. Out of that, you will see a lot of gameplay. They will create job opportunities. People will land again. All the experience is very valuable. So
he thinks it's going to happen now. What with all the firings from companies and people losing their jobs and studios disbanding or firing 5, 10, 15, 20%. He thinks they'll end up in some other way and start new offshoots. No one has a crystal ball. But we're kind of seeing it a little bit already via the resurgence or the rise of non-AAA gaming, indie devs. Like, I feel like the representation of indie dev and interest in it is higher than for many years. And there's a bit of a purge against high-level shit. Like, not so great games that were very expensive and made by very reputable and long-running game companies. It's the age of indie games. The age of men is over.
So I don't think people sometimes realize how much a company loses when somebody goes away.
Yeah.
Because it's just the training, the onboarding, the tribal knowledge that is really, really valuable. When I see the people that are getting fired today, I'm saying that it's impossible. Like I talked about this, Wizards of the Coast, they had a really large layoff. There's nobody left from my original room with whom we were making, and you worked with those people, and you said there's so much knowledge about D&D here, and that's gone. It's just gone. So that's I'm not judging any.
That's scary.
In any way, but it is. You can see that knowledge is out there.
The final question I want to ask is, you've mentioned a bunch of times that you were basically, almost broke, done. And you have bounced back. What is the kind of mentality of the studio now? Do you still, I imagine, like having been through that so many times, you'd probably have the fear of that constantly being there. Are you past that point now where you're confident, you're like, we're good, we're going to be fine no matter what happens?
Not a good mindset to have, by the way. We're safe now.
It's because of the successes, or do you still have that this could fall apart at any moment mentality?
No. So what you learn is to have fallback positions. So as we progressed, as the studio has been growing, I've been increasing our fallback positions. So if something goes wrong, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And if that goes wrong, I know exactly what we're going to do. So that was very much built in. And was also the reason why I knew when we took on Baldur's Gate 3, okay, we're going to be fine. But it remains really, really important. I can't stress it enough to have the dashboarding to see where you are. Like if you're going to travel across the North Pole with your car, you need to know how much fuel you have in your car, or you're going to freeze to death. Right? So that's the really important bit. It's knowing what you're doing.
So there was a point at which if Baldur's Gate 3 via early access was not performing and they weren't selling enough, that they would have had to release a much worse version of it or something, or maybe cancel it and then fall back onto something they feel is a safer project or whatever, when the money runs out. Because he's saying he has fallback position, which means he's got some money lined up, which he previously said from Divinity, until here and no further if it's failing.
Which is sometimes really complicated in something as messy as game development. So people should not underestimate the importance of the production departments that give you that dashboard reading.
Take it from someone who's made a very big game that is very successful. Final question. What are you playing now? What are you excited about playing? I always ask that question to developers, because it's we've shut ourselves in a room for 4 years to make this game. You've been gone for 6 years. I'm sure you played some games, but what are the games that excite you currently, either during the process of making development or now?
So I've been playing Balatro a lot. Balatro is fantastic. If you're not playing Balatro, play Balatro.
Coming to phones soon, which is a dangerous thing.
I've been playing discovering Vampire Survivors.
Oh, nice.
I hadn't played it yet, so I went on a holiday and I was playing Vampire Survivors the entire time.
It's fantastic.
And we're trying to convince them to do something with Baldur's Gate, because there's a Vampire Survivors. That's
all right,
really
I'll
cool.
get it.
I've been trying to. I bought a Lenovo Legion with the intention of installing Alan Wake 2 on it, because I still haven't played it. But I got region locked.
Oh, what? Damn.
So I was in Quebec, and so I'm from Belgium, so I need to go back.
Oh no.
It was a really weird time. It was a credit card thing, but so that's the one I want to play next. And then Dragon's Dogma 2, which is coming out
very soon.
Yes, this week, right?
Yeah,
it's Friday. So that one that is definitely also on my list.
Those Alan Wake 2, I can say for certain you're gonna have a wonderful time with, because it is fantastic. But Sven, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you coming and giving us some insight into how you make games, and hope you have a great rest of GDC.
Thank you very much.
Nice video. Props to Sven for not just making an incredible game, but being an incredible human. Amen. Cool. And he said the next RPG is going to be even bigger in scale than Baldur's Gate 3. That's crazy. Very cool video.